Hi there, my name is Katrina Smith, and I chose to do my final paper on Yupik and Athabascan dance and comparing the two, since there are some significant differences in the two. And I guess a little bit of background of why I chose that to be my topic was because one of my close friends, Danae, is Alaska Native, and specifically she's Koyukon and Inupiaq, and I'll show a map so you can see specifically where those groups are, but she told me that Athabascan and Yupik dance are very different and that they'd be interesting to kind of compare side by side. And I also chose this topic because I used to work at the Riverboat Discovery, and she was an Alaska Native guide, and I listened to her tour many times, and they had never really touched on the dance side of the culture. And I think it's really important to look closely at the Alaska Native people's dance styles and see their traditions and how this culture is kind of like their cultural makeup of the people. The dance is a really strong social aspect as well of the Alaska Native people. So here's the map, and so I chose Athabascan and Yupik culture to look at, and then Danae, who I was mentioning, she's Inupiaq, so up on that northern area of Alaska. She's also Koyukon Athabascan, so she's kind of got a mix of a little bit of everything. So she was a really good resource for my paper. So starting off, the Athabascan people are, as we know, like in the Fairbanks area, and they're a pretty wide range of people. And the interior, as we know, being in Fairbanks, is really harsh winters and dry and cold for a long period of time. So that kind of also influences their clothing, and which was a part of their dance. And then the Yupik people were off to the coastline, and it was much more wet and damp, and they kind of experienced a different element which influenced their dance as well. So here's just a general picture of Yupik clothing, and I talked a lot about the clothing because that is like a major part of their dance and what it looks like. So their clothing was generally light caribou skins that were like tanned, and an interesting fact I found while researching this is that the moose brains were used to tan and like preserve, I guess in a sense, their skin, and they scraped it and soaked it and hung and dried, scraped and soaked, and it's a really long process of multiple steps to get it to a tangible, lightweight clothing material. So the Yupik people are known for their dovetail on the front, that point that comes out in the front and the back. That's a very Yupik style of clothing. Also, it was very much so, the detail was of shells that they oftentimes traded for to decorate their clothing. The women oftentimes wore the skin leggings and like a pullover type top, which is really common in the Alaska Native culture, the pullover type clothing. And then the Athabascan clothing was much different. As you can see, they wore long fur parkas, usually with many types of fur, such as wolverine around the face. The bodies were usually made of muskrats, and they also had beaver, mink. There was kind of a big variety, or even caribou was a highly used fur. And as we know, their clothing has direct relation to their environment. So the fur, obviously, was colder in the Athabascan area, so they had more fur and was a warmer kind of style of clothing. And an interesting fact is that when I mentioned trading for the shells for their clothing, they obviously traded more than just that. But the Gwich'in people and Koyukon people would come together and dance, and it would be like a trading kind of ceremony, which is interesting because when I first went into this paper, I was thinking that dance was only done during like happy occasions, but it's pretty much done for anything, honoring people, funerals, trading, pretty much for anything. It kind of represents how they feel, I guess. So then the Athabascans have a very kind of a particular style of dance. It's called the stick dance, and it was developed by the Koyukon people. And it's known as like a marathon circle dance that takes place around a pole that's stuck into the ground and standing straight up, usually in the center of town or the village. And it's a celebration of people that have passed away and honoring people that might have passed away since the last stick dance they had. And even today in the 21st century, there are still some Koyukon villages around that are still practicing this dance, which is really amazing that they're able to preserve this tradition and culture for as long as they have. It was interesting that the Yupik people, like the format of their dancing was very specific, which is also how their culture is pretty set in stone. They do things the same way that they've done for thousands of years. So generally, as you can see in this photo here to the left, the men were kneeling down in front usually, while the women were standing in the back, and they also had drums. And it was very common that they had wooden masks that they would hand make, and feathers were obviously gathered from the shore seagulls and what other shore birds. And the traditional clothing that they're wearing is the kuspuk, and each pattern is different and specific to a family or to a village. The patterns are carried down from generation to generation. Actually, my friend Nay, who I mentioned earlier, made me a kuspuk, and the pattern is like 250 years old. Her grandma won't share it with anybody outside of the family, and then oftentimes they have the headbands with fur, and they all symbolize different things. And to the right there is one of the wooden masks with the feathers, and they often had fans too in their hands. That everything was handmade. And as I mentioned, the dance is a very important piece in their social life of these people. It's kind of a big gathering, and oftentimes potlatches were included in these dance times. And the Athabascan people we can see generally wore like the lighter weight caribou moose hides. Always had drums in the front. It was almost kind of like in a circle sometimes. This picture looks to be like at in front of a bunch of people, like a presentation kind of, and their vests oftentimes, you can see the guy off to the right in the picture has beading. Beading was a very important craft, I guess you could say, in the Athabascan people. Different flowers meant different status. So, for an example, a woman would have different flowers, usually the forget-me-not, to represent that her husband was a good hunter. And they always had moccasins wearing, you can see down on their feet, moccasins like trimmed with fur, and the drums oftentimes made of skin that is tightly pulled around a wooden frame. And so all in all, I think looking at the Alaska Native people and their dance and traditions and clothing, we can have a better understanding of them as a whole, and kind of how they bring everything together and why they do things the way they do. And each dance has a different meaning. Each dance and song has a story behind it. It's not just kind of how we listen to music on the radio. It's just a song, but their songs and dance have very strong meaning, and the meaning and story is often carried down from generation to generation. And even today in the 21st century, people are able to preserve that story and the meaning and pass it on to the younger generations. And out speaking with Danae, her grandparents have been able to teach her the ways of Athabascan and the Inupiaq people, and she wasn't raised in a village, but here even in Fairbanks she's able to make kuspuks with her grandma, and she beads and makes earrings and still upholds that Alaska Native lifestyle. And it's very important, I feel like, as people looking into it, to know why and know the meaning behind it. And I think it's really important for us to even help them preserve and carry out their traditions, because it's a community and it's just what community members do. So this is a very interesting topic that I researched, and I want to research more about it and speak more with the Alaska Native people in the area and see what their opinions and their stories are about it. So, thank you.